It should be obvious, but nonetheless, we know that debate did come off very well. We're able to sit back and watch it at a later date, and we're thankful that BJ is able to take out of his busy schedule and come to be with us this evening. I didn't know this until not too awful long ago that, in fact, BJ was born in Illinois, but he's got over that very well. He would pass for a good old Southern boy just about among anybody that I know, and that he began his preaching career almost 20 years ago when he was 9 years old. And so he's certainly a polished preacher, has wonderful abilities, and presently we are so thankful that he is the director of the Memphis School of Preaching. And I know that he will, if you ask him about that, and if you've got someone that you would like to get going towards Memphis to become a gospel preacher, then he could receive no greater instruction than at that fine institution. And that's been the case for years and years. There's been a lot of people that we've had right here in this pulpit that's graduated from Memphis, and they come in all shapes and sizes, but every single one of them can preach. I'll just tell you. So that always speaks well of what you're involved in, and we are delighted to have Brother B.J. Clark here to speak to us through Thursday evening. So at this time, let's give him our wholehearted attention.
I'm really glad to be here, and really appreciate every time I get to come to Dunlap. I practiced that in the car, and it sounded better in the car than it did just now. I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you for your encouragement to our work at Memphis School of Preaching. Thank you for your encouragement of all kinds of good works. I'm so thrilled to know that Brother Dearman is a part of your good work here as well, and just Brother Clayton I've known for years and appreciated his faithfulness, and just your leadership here, your membership. You're just really a special congregation, and anyone that gets to come and spend some time with you leaves richer and more blessed. I can promise you that. I really believe that's true. Now, when you want to talk about the rich fool, you might ask this question: which one? Because the Bible speaks of more than one rich fool. And as a matter of fact, as a lead-in to the rich fool that we've been assigned to talk about tonight, in Luke 12, I want to first talk about one in Psalm 49 that really paves the way for a discussion of Luke 12. And so would you go to your Bible in Psalm number 49? Psalm 49, and notice that in this particular psalm, in verse 6, there's some mentioned, it says, that trust in their wealth. Where do they put their trust? In the amount of possessions that they possess. They trust in their wealth. And if you listen to them long enough, watch this, they boast. They boast themselves in the multitude of their riches. They're so focused on what they have, and they'll be the first to tell you about what they have. They're heard to boast, and they're heard to boast about themselves and what they possess. And then you read about how none of them, with all of the possessions they possess, can buy the thing that matters most, and that is life. What can you pay? What would Steve Jobs have paid for more life upon this earth? You know, he had the money. He would have been willing, I'm sure, to pay for extraordinary life-saving procedures. In fact, I think he'd already invested, from my recollection and study and reading of some of the articles. He'd tried everything that he could get his hands on that would maybe perhaps take his health condition and improve it so that he could stay on this planet. But he couldn't buy his redemption, his life, and neither can anyone. Now watch verse number 10. What do we end up seeing? Wise men die, but likewise the fool and the brutish person perish, and do what? Leave their wealth to others. Kind of reminds you of this question, then who shall those things be? file that away. We'll come back to it. Notice in verse 15, what is the inward thought of many of these individuals? Well, their inward thinking is really this: my house will continue forever. I'll dwell and continue in all generations. My dwelling place will continue to exist. Watch this. They call their lands after their own names. And I've always found this fascinating. You can have a stadium named after you and think, boy, I've really hit the big time. And then some years later, someone else comes along and says, hey, you know what? We'll pay you more money to name it after us. And there you've lost your big time. No longer are you as big time as you used to be, because someone else bought those naming rights. And then you notice he says in verse number 12, nevertheless, man being in honor abideth not. Man doesn't stay on the planet. He's going to be here, but he's going to perish. He's going to die and leave this earth. And notice verse 13, we said, rich fool, this their way is their folly. It's foolishness. And yet their posterity never seem to get the memo on this. They never seem to learn the lessons that need to be learned about why was it worth it to spend all these years accumulating more and more and more and more stuff just to die and leave it all behind for someone else? And you remember Solomon would later write in his inspired diary of how you can leave it to someone else, and what might they do with it? Squander it and treat it as if it has no value whatsoever, even after you worked so hard to get it. And we've seen individuals do this very thing. He mentions individuals who are like sheep laid in the grave. Death feeds upon them, and the upright have dominion over them in the morning. Their beauty consumes in the grave from their dwelling. Someone says, this is very depressing. I don't want to think about this. But look, it's the reality of the situation. And that is, I don't care how attractive the man is or the woman is, how much money they possess, whether they have $1 million smile or $1 million mansion. Bottom line is, someday they're going to be embalmed, and they're going to perish physically, and their house will be lived in by someone else, and someone will wear their clothes or sell them to someone else who will. And you can just go down the list. And that's why he says in verse 16, be not thou afraid when one is made rich, when the glory of his house is increased. For when he dieth, what? He shall carry nothing away. His glory shall not descend after him. Although while he lived, he blessed his soul. And men will praise you when you do good for yourself, he says. When he dies, he goes to the generation of his fathers, and they'll never see light. You see, man that is in honor and doesn't understand this, he says, he's like the beasts that perish. He is going to live, and then he's going to die. And yet there's one very important exception. The beasts cease to exist altogether. Man lives on. And then what? That brings us to Luke chapter 12, and I want you to notice, we'll be coming back to Psalms here in just a moment to notice something. But in Luke chapter 12, it's so important to get the background for what's going on here. Jesus didn't just bring things up for arbitrary reasons. He had a very specific reason he told this parable that we're about to study, and I want to show you what it is. And for years, I preached on this parable in my early preaching life and never paid enough attention to the context leading up to it. I want to correct that tonight, at least as far as I can. In Luke 12, you'll notice that Jesus is talking about matters that matter. He says, oh, don't be afraid, verse 4, of those who kill the body, but after that, they don't have any more they could do. Fear him which after he is killed has power to cast into hell. Fear him. And so the soul that lives on after the body has died is the most important thing that you and I possess. He mentions a number of things there that are also mentioned in the Sermon on the Mount and in Matthew's account. But notice, if you will, he talks about verse 10. If you speak a word against the Son of Man, it shall be forgiven. But if you blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, it shall not be forgiven. They'll bring you into synagogues, magistrates' powers. He tells them, don't take any thought of how or what you'll answer, what you'll say. The Holy Spirit will teach you in the same hour what you ought to say. And these were things spoken back then to a specific group of people, not for all days and times, because we have a different way that the God of heaven speaks to us today. But I want to drive this home. What's Jesus just been talking about? A sin against the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, he's talking about spiritual things, and someone interrupts. One of the company says unto him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. Can you imagine? Here's Jesus talking about eternal matters, matters that matter. And where's this fellow's mind? On earthly stuff. I don't think that I'm getting a fair share of earthly stuff. And I want you to talk to my brother, and I want you to set him straight and make sure that he properly divides the inheritance with me. I want some stuff, and I don't think I'm going to get it unless someone steps in and makes my brother divide it and give it to me. I want you to notice the pronouns that we're about to see. Verse 14, he said unto him, Jesus speaks directly to the one who made this request, and he says unto him, Man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? Now he's speaking of this in the realm of his physical stuff. Jesus is a judge, yes, on the day of judgment he will be, John 5:22. But as far as doling out material things and determining who gets what in the material realm, Jesus is not concerned about immaterial things such as that. He is concerned about matters that matter. And I want you to notice, he takes this man's interrupting statement and turns it into something for the whole crowd. Watch the pronoun now in verse 15. And he said unto them. First he addresses the man who made the request, and then realizes, of course, knows all along, in fact, that everyone there needs the following story. Not just this man, but the entire crowd needs this story. And what is it? He spake a parable unto them, but what did he say first? Don't get ahead of him in verse 16 and forget verse 15. Take heed. If Jesus says stop and take notice, I want to stop and take notice. Take heed. Beware. Beware of what? Covetousness. For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. And to further make this point, he spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully, and he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? And he said, This will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Let me pause right here. And I'm not the first preacher to ever say this, and so I'm not in any way, shape, or form seeking to act like I invented this phrase, but this man has an eye problem, right? And it's not up here. It's in his Bible heart, being the mind. He is so focused on whom? It's all about him. My. I said we'd be going back to Psalm 49. Remember I said to you there was that statement made there in Psalm 49 about they boast themselves. They boast themselves, verse 6, in the multitude of their riches. Look how much stuff I have. And they brag about their amount of possessions. What is this man doing? I've got so much stuff, I don't know what to do with it. I guess I'm going to have to pull down these barns and build even greater storage facilities. I'm going to build more things because I am really living it up, and I need to. Wait a minute. Might there be a widow down the road who could use some of your surplus grain, sir? Might there be a destitute child whose father has abandoned the family? And might you be able to take some of your surplus grain and go down the road and help this family? Do you think we're the only culture that's ever had needy people, legitimately needy people living in our midst? Could he not have found some folks that could have used some of this surplus grain? You tell me. You know he could have. But then that wouldn't have been his. It's all about mine. My. I. And I wish that you could just take the time sometime to go through and count the personal pronouns and look at just how focused this man is upon himself. I didn't come up with this either, but I sure like pointing it out because it's really important. What's the middle letter of the word sin? I. What's the middle letter of the word pride? I. And when I am focused more on what I want, then I've forgotten the very point Jesus said in Matthew 16:24, if any man would come after me, let him do what? Deny what? Himself. Deny whom? Himself. And take up his cross, meaning something that you would be willing to die upon, your instrument of death, your sacrifice. Well, what are you willing to sacrifice? What am I willing to sacrifice for the Lord? Am I willing to put to death certain lusts? Am I willing to put to death certain desires for things and more and more and more and more stuff? This man was so focused on getting more, and we look at him and think, you know what? I think he's an ancient example. There's no one like him in our world in our day and time. Are you kidding me? You know better. I listened to a radio program, this has been years ago now, by the way, but this athlete was literally saying on a radio interview when he had demanded that his contract, which had just been signed the year before and for several years, he wanted it renegotiated because some other guy in the league that he thought he was better than was making a new contract, making more money, and so I've got to have more money instead of honoring the contract that he'd signed. And so this is what he actually said. He said when he was demanding $25 million a year now to play the particular sport that he was playing, when the interviewer asked him if he didn't have any conscience problems with making such a demand or request, he said, well, I've got to feed my family, you know. Now, if you can't feed your family on $20 million a year or $15 million a year instead of 25, where are you eating every night? Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, morning, noon, and night, and for snacks in between? That wouldn't even cover that. This is ludicrous. Solomon, what do you tell us about this desire for silver in Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10? He that loveth silver, what? I'm not going to be satisfied with silver. Why not? Well, there's gold. I'd rather have gold. And so here we are, someone says, I've got to have more stuff. And so we think to ourselves, well, that would never be me. Well, let me just ask you, I'm not accusing, I'm just asking. Have you ever said in your mind or out loud to your wife or family, if I could ever make this amount of money a year, if I could ever reach that figure a year, I'd be okay. That'd be enough money to pay the bills, pay the mortgage, put a little aside for a rainy day or in case of emergencies. And so, yeah, if I could ever make X number of dollars a year, I'd finally be happy. And lo and behold, you start making X number of dollars a year, and then you start spending more than you've spent in the past because you now have more than you've had in the past. And you're heard to say, if I could make this much a year, I'd finally be happy. Okay. And you finally make X number of dollars a year, are you happy? Have you reached the zenith and pinnacle of happiness and joy? I'm spending more now because I'm making more now. Now, I look around and I say, we got so much stuff, I don't know where else we can put more stuff. I know. We'll rent a little place down the road to store the stuff we can't fit in our houses. And so we buy those facilities, or rent those facilities rather, and I'm not saying it's inherently wrong to do this. I'm just asking some questions to provoke thinking and thought, because there are times when those things are necessary for temporary measures, or for certain items that we might come into possession of because loved ones pass away and we don't have any place to put some of their stuff, but we don't want to just get rid of it without serious consideration. And so I'm not saying that it's wrong to have one of these places, but if our motivation in having one of these places is, I just got to get some more, then we've missed the real point of living. Amen. And I want to go to a New Testament passage, and then we're going to come back to Luke chapter 12, but I want to go to 1 Timothy chapter 6, because here is a companion text to this very concept of thinking, oh, I've got to have more. I've got to have more. In fact, 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse number 6 says that godliness with what? Contentment is great gain. Does the rich fool in Luke 12 remind you of someone that is the definition of contentment? I've got to have more for my surplus, more places for my... He's not content. He's always looking for more. Verse number 7 with this little sobering reminder. For we brought what into this world? What did you bring into this world, dear friend, besides your physical body and soul that inhabits your physical body? You weren't born wearing a Rolex watch. You weren't born wearing a designer outfit from any place on the planet. You weren't born with a set of keys in your hand to the finest Ferrari on the planet. You weren't born with, you name it, a gold brick or bar in your hand. No, what were you born with? You brought what into this world? What did I bring into this world? We brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. I preached a funeral one time, and as the family filed by the casket for the last time, they all placed 2 brand new $1 bills in the coffin with their loved one. You might ask, why would they do that? And I'm not criticizing them for doing it necessarily. I'm just saying I want you to know what they did, and then I want to make a comment about it that I know they even would agree with. This loved one of theirs was sick in the hospital for a pretty extended period of time. And he was always concerned about their comfort and didn't want them staying the night at the hospital with them. He wanted them to get a good night's rest. He didn't want them staying with him, so he'd send them home. But before he'd let them leave, he did say this. He said, now you check my sock. Check my sock and make sure that you tuck $2 bills inside my sock so that if they discharge me in the morning before you get here, I'll have enough of money on me to buy a cup of coffee and a newspaper. That shows you how long ago this has been too, right? I want to have enough on my person to buy a cup of coffee and a newspaper. So he'd always say before they left for the night, check my sock and make sure I got my 2. All right, you've got your 2. You're ready. So remembering this quirk about him, they're walking by the casket, they're all putting brand new $1 bills, 2 $1 bills inside the coffin. And they close the lid. Money's still in there. Now I'm just asking, what if they'd put $2 million in there? Would that have changed anything? Did they really think he was going to be able to spend this? No, they didn't. But that's really my point. I like what one fellow said. He said, I tell you what, I'll take all the dollars out of there, write a check, put the check back in. And, well, no, that won't work either. He can't cash the check, can he? Friends, here's my point. Here's Paul's point. When you and I leave, we might be given a sentimental object there in the coffin, but usually even that doesn't stay in the coffin because we want that remembrance of our loved one. And so very few things remain with our loved ones, and we realize this is just the shell. This is not the person, it's the house in which the person is living. We need to be reminded in verse number 8, having food and raiment, let us therewith be content. You see, verse 9, and I like the way the New King James Version translates verse 9, they that desire to be rich. They who, you say, yeah, you know what, I think those rich people who are already, look, there's some folks who aren't yet as rich as the rich fool of Luke 12, but they want to be. They'd give anything to be as rich as he was, and they think they'll be the exception to being finally and ultimately happy if they could just have a lot of stuff. Okay? Well, let's test that theory. What does the Bible say in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 9 about those who desire to be rich? They're falling into a temptation, a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and what? Pierce themselves through with many sorrows. When will we ever get the memo from Solomon? Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. I had so much money, Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 10, whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. If I saw it and I wanted it, I bought it. My mother is no longer with us, but when she was, she used to watch a lot of these shopping network shows or those shopping channel shows, but I noticed she never bought anything. She just watched. I said, Mom, why do you watch these if you can't afford to buy anything? She said, I just like looking at the items, you know, but she couldn't afford them. I wonder, and I've asked this question before in a crowd with young people in the audience. Young people will tell you the truth, won't they? They'll nod their head, and I remember asking this in one church where I was preaching in their building, and I said, if you had enough money that you could buy anything you wanted, the moment you wanted it, any item in the world you wanted, you had enough money to buy it, would you be happy? And I remember one little boy I looked at, who was out there going like, uh-huh, yes. If only. No more Walmart trips with mom and dad saying we can't afford it. We can buy every toy in the store, boy. Okay, let's say you buy every toy in the store for your child. Will they be happy? A new toy's going to come out tomorrow, right? And you've seen it. Oh, I've got to have this for my birthday. I've got to have this for the holidays. I've got to have it, got to have it, got to have it. And you invest more than you really thought you ever would for that gift because you really want to make them happy. And 2 hours after they open it and scream with joy, you've heard it, they're playing with a box, right? And you're like, what happened? Same thing that's always happened. We tend to think if I could just get me some things, I'd finally find true happiness. You've driven by the houses in your area. Have you ever seen that house and thought to yourself, oh, if I could own that house. I don't even know who lives in the house that I saw on my drive here today. It was tucked up in the bunch of trees, pretty highly elevated, looking out, and I thought, whoa, now there's a pretty big house. And I wondered as I was thinking about this message for tonight, and maybe the person is truly happy. Abram was very rich in silver and gold and cattle, but I promise you this, he was happy not because of those things, but because he was faithful to God. That's where his true happiness was found. But it's not wrong to be blessed. If God has blessed you, wonderful. Keep it in perspective and don't let your possessions possess you. But do remember this. Those who think, oh, if I could just get me some stuff, I'd finally be happy, need to hear what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 2:17. Therefore, I hated life. I hated it. I used to preach 5 miles from where Elvis Presley used to live. South Haven Church of Christ building, 5 miles down the same road from Elvis's mansion. So I'm preaching one Sunday morning. We've got a subject on 1 Timothy 6 that I'm preaching, and I'm going through this text verse by verse. And I just happened to mention that I'd read an article in which Elvis Presley had been interviewed, in which he had made this statement: sometimes I believe I'm the most miserable man on earth. The reporter's like, come on, Elvis, seriously, come on. Sometimes I believe I'm the most miserable man on the earth. He wouldn't take it back. And the guy's like pointing out to him, you live in a mansion, 20-plus room mansion, and you've got your private jet waiting to whisk you away to some exotic place. You've got attractive women who think you're attractive and would love to be your girlfriend. And you've got more money than most of us will have in a combined lifetime of incomes. You've got your gold platinum records on the wall, your horse stables, your in-ground pool, your limo to take you in style wherever you want to go. You're miserable? Well, I'll trade you. A lot of folks think, oh, that's a good trade. No, it's not. So I preach this, and I think nothing more about it until Tuesday night. I go to visit this couple that had been visiting our services that Sunday morning, and I just wanted to drop by and say, so glad you came. Hope you'll come again. They were very enthusiastic to see me. Welcomed me on in and sat me down in the living room, and then the lady spoke up and said, we had not been to church in 17 years. And the first Sunday we decided to go back to church, we preached on Elvis. Wasn't that amazing? Well, it was amazing to me because I didn't think I'd preached on Elvis. I'd mentioned one thing about him in an exposition of 1 Timothy 6. And I'd spent most of my time in the Bible that day, but that's what stood out to her. And I said, well, why did that, make such a big impression on you? And she said, oh, well, because Gene here is Elvis's first cousin. His mother and Elvis's mother are sisters. And I married Gene, and we lived at Graceland for a while. Can I be honest with you and tell you that when she claimed that, in my mind, I was thinking, oh boy. Bless these people's hearts. They think they lived with Elvis, and they think they're related to him. This is going to be a short visit. I'm going to make my way out of here pretty soon because these people are not even connected to reality. Here come the photo albums. Here we are in the set of this movie with Elvis. Here we are at the holiday party with Elvis. Here we are, this, that, and the other. And I'm just astonished. This is long before the days of photoshopping and things of that nature. They're telling me the truth. And Gene spoke up. He said, you know, you really took me down memory lane Sunday morning. I said, how's that? He said, I was in the room when that interview was conducted. He said Elvis would allow us to sit there in the room if we didn't interfere and listen to what was being said. And he said, I was there. And he said, I can promise you that you will never understand, never have any idea unless you saw it as we did, how absolutely flustered and confused and perplexed and bewildered this reporter was that a man who had what Elvis had could be sitting there saying, I think sometimes I'm the most miserable man on earth? We want what you have, Elvis. Elvis wanted something more, and it wasn't material, was it? Friends, this rich fool was a fool for so many reasons. And I cut my eye teeth as a young preacher on that sermon outline book by Melvin J. Wise, The All-Sufficiency of the Gospel, and he has an excellent outline in that particular sermon outline book about this rich fool. And you think about all that he had, and yet he left God out of his life. And that's the most important failure that anyone could ever be guilty of, is to leave God out. I want you to notice that God has to confront this rich fool with his foolishness. Would you go to Luke 12 again with me and notice something? This rich fool is confronted by God. Remember, his plan is, the rich fool's plan is, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'll pull down my barns and build greater ones. Verse 18, there will I bestow all my, for it's mine, my fruits, my goods. I'll say to my soul even belongs to me. It's not anyone else's. Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Tell me, would it have done this man well to read James 4? You that say, today or tomorrow, we will go into such and such a city, and we will spend a year there, and we will buy and sell and get gain. And then what was the statement made? Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow. What is your life? It's a vapor that appears for a little time and then it's gone. Vanishes away. Mr. Rich Fool, you have so many plans for so many years with so much stuff, and you don't even realize. Verse 20, but God said unto him, thou fool. The word thou is actually supplied by the translators. Now, I know the Bible talks about us using the term fool in a way that's unscripturally done. But God knows who fools are and who they aren't. And literally, if you read this as it appears in the original, God said unto him, fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee, and then who shall those things be? And don't miss the sarcasm here, divine sarcasm, which thou hast provided? You did this? Well, I read in James 1:17 that every good and perfect gift comes from where? From the Father above. I read that all of my blessings, He's the one that sends the sunshine and the rain. He sends the harvest, gold and grain. Sunshine and rain, harvest of grain. He's my friend. Jesus is all the world to me. We sing that sometimes. Look, this man is focused on worldly things only, and I love what someone wrote, and I wish I could take credit for it because I think it's profound, but it's not original with me, but I hope you'll never forget it. Where you go hereafter is determined by what you go after here. No wonder Jesus said, lay not up for yourselves treasures where? Upon the earth. Why not? They deteriorate. They can rust out. They can wear out. They can be stolen. I have a friend, dear friend, who had a baseball card collection that someone broke into his house and stole it. My mother, by the way, when I was come home from college for the first time, I went and looked in my room, and my baseball cards and the shoe boxes that were there, they were all gone. I said, Mom, I was looking for my baseball cards. She said, oh, I threw all those out. I said, you did what, Mom? Well, you're not a little boy anymore. I didn't think you'd want them anymore. I don't know what those would have been worth. But I have a dear friend, I know what his collection was worth. And he had one card in there, his collection would have been worth even more. He had a Roberto Clemente card from one of his, I think his rookie year, and he'd written across the top of it in ink, "Gone but not forgotten." He'd written on a Mickey Mantle card that was worth a lot. He wrote across the face of it in ink, "Retired." He didn't know at the time what these things would be worth, but you know what? If he'd owned every rookie card of every great player that's ever played, from Honus Wagner on down, if he'd owned the most priceless cards of all, let me ask you a question, and he tried to hand those to God on the day of judgment and said, well, will this get me in? You tell me. It's not material. You and I need to recognize verse 21 of Luke number 12. So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Remember Psalm 49, they have this boast of themselves and the riches that are that belong to themselves. And he says, you need to be rich toward God. I want to close out by looking in the last 3 or 4 minutes here at Luke 16 just rather rapidly, because it's so close to this and so on the same target that I want to close out with it. Luke 16, and you'll notice that Jesus has just said no servant, verse 13, can serve two masters. He's either going to hate the one and love the other, or hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. The Pharisees, who were covetous, same problem that Jesus warns against in Luke 12:13. The Pharisees heard all these things and they derided him. They spoke derisively of him and made fun of him for actually taking such a position. And he said, look, I'll tell you this, that which is highly esteemed among men is abomination in the sight of God. And then verse 19 tells them this story about a certain rich man clothed in purple and fine linen, faring sumptuously every day. He's got it all. You and I would love to have what he had: a nice house, wonderful wardrobe, abundance of food, and a lot of stuff. Rich. Oh, I wouldn't want to be Lazarus, someone says. Look at him. There at the gate, full of sores, desiring to be fed with crumbs that just fell from the rich man's table. The dogs come and lick his sores, but no one else seems to want to help him. Came to pass, the beggar dies. He's carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also dies, is buried. In hell torment he lift up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. Now who would you rather be, dear friend? We named our youngest son Michael after a young man named Mike Savage that I met in Knoxville, Tennessee. When I first started preaching there, I was able to work and help restore Mike and his brother Jeff to the Lord. Mike was on fire. He came to me, met a girl. I had a Bible study with her, baptized her into Christ. And then he came to me one Sunday morning. He said, I got 2 words for you: getting married. Will you do the ceremony? I said, I'd be honored to do your ceremony. Then he came to me a few months later after the wedding, and he says, the doctors say I've got an infection. They're trying to treat it, and they don't know what's wrong and how to get rid of it. It seems to be lingering. Well, the misdiagnosed infection was actually cancer. And I watched him, on fire for the Lord, wither away on his couch over a period of 2 years. And I preached his funeral when he was 26 years old. And we named our son Michael in his honor. At that very same time, Howard Stern was all the rage. He'd just signed a $100 million contract, I think it was, with satellite radio to say anything he wanted to say, filthy as it could be. I'll pay money to speak filth to the world and bless the world with my filth. And yet here he is, millionaire living in his mansion. They made a movie about him that was raunchy as he is. And they can try to sanitize him on the television show America's Got Talent when he was a judge. I never watched the program when he was a judge to know how he behaved on there, but I know how he behaved in the articles I read about the kinds of things he would say on the radio, stuff that has not blessed anyone's life. Filth. He's living in a mansion. Mike's dying on a couch. I don't wish anything bad on Howard Stern. I hope, I really do, that he can find the gospel and be saved before the Lord comes or before he passes from this life. But I promise you this, and I mean it, as hard as it is for me to say it, I mean it. I would rather die on my couch as a Christian, penniless, than in a mansion as a millionaire headed for eternal hell. And so I need to get my priorities right. Otherwise, I'm foolish. I need to learn from the rich fool not to leave God out of my life. He's first. He's foremost. And if I seek him first, all the things I need will be added unto me.